Hello and welcome to How Did They Do That? The show where we pick out a small detail, effect or interesting moment from a game and break down how the game's developer achieved it. Today, we will be taking a look at mirrors in games like Mario 64 and GTA San Andreas. The effect we'll be discussing has been used in a huge amount of games for quite some time, and as far as I can tell since Duke Nukem 3D. As such, covering all of them would be nigh on impossible, so we'll only be discussing a few. There are several ways to emulate mirrors and reflective surfaces, but a lot of them are very resource hogging and have only really been possible fairly recently due to improvements in hardware. So how exactly do they work in games like Mario 64? In short, it's a two-step process, but in order to effectively explain it, I need to quickly cover how a game's camera would typically work. A game camera is handled similarly to how a real-world camera works, whereby it can only see what's in front of it. Most game engines will cull objects that fall outside of the camera's field of view, because rendering them would be a waste of system resources. So, the obvious thing to do would be to turn off this culling and have the mirror reflect as it does in the real world, right? Well, whilst this would work in theory, it would actually waste a lot of memory. Typically, a game's camera has a fairly long render distance. If you're only rendering what's in front of you, you're seeing roughly 180 degrees of the world. If you were to render what's behind the camera as well to see 360 degrees, you're literally doubling the amount of polygons you need to render. This amount of unnecessary rendering is a big no-no, so a very clever and yet simple workaround was created. Effectively, you take whatever you need to be shown in the mirror, typically a small room with a few props, and create a copy flipped along its Y or X axis. Next, you butt this up to the part of the wall with a hole left in it where the mirror would be, and voila! The finishing touch will be to add a transparent texture between the two rooms, to sell that the mirror is scratched, coloured, etc. There is one more piece to the puzzle, however, the character. Now, the room itself would likely be static. In fact, even if an object were animated, its movements are predictable and easily mirrored. The character, however, is player controlled and therefore unpredictable, so a slightly different approach has to be made. Effectively, the character is mirrored in the same way as the rest of the room, but it's programmed to invert the player's control inputs, resulting in a mirrored movement. It's also worth noting that this copy of the player is often only spawned in when the real player model is close enough to be seen by the mirror, again, to save memory. As you can see, the effect is nearly perfect. The only real issue is that often when the character is positioned very close to the mirror, parts of both the main character and its mirrored copy may clip through the wall, resulting in some very odd looking results. Such as here, when you can see CJ's bat is actually coming out of the mirror on both sides. This method has been used to great effect in many games, and is still often used today. In fact, even variations of the method have been implemented, such as reflective ice on the Z-axis in games like Crash Bandicoot and Spyro. And that about wraps it up for today. Is there an effect or detail you've seen in a game that's had you wondering, how did they do that? If so, be sure to leave it in the comments below and we may just cover it. Thanks for watching, ta-ra!